Lyra had always known that life as a princess came with rules, but she had never imagined that one small mistake could change everything. On her home planet, a world filled with towering crystalline cities and skies that shimmered with colors humans could only dream of, the laws were strict and the Council of Elders was merciless. They watched the people carefully, punishing not just crimes but even acts of disobedience that threatened the delicate balance of power. It had started as a minor disagreement, a clash with a council member over the use of resources for her charity projects. Lyra had spoken her mind, refusing to accept their reasoning, insisting that the citizens deserved better. The council considered her words rebellious, seeing them as an affront to authority. While most of the population might have seen it as a noble act of courage, to the elders it was a dangerous defiance. The punishment was shocking. Instead of exile, fines, or a simple reprimand, they decreed something no one had ever heard of before. She would marry a human. The council viewed humans as simple, unpredictable creatures, hardly worth the attention of alien royalty. But as punishment, it was perfect. They wanted to humble her, to show her that not even a princess could defy their laws without consequence. Lyra was furious. She felt her blood boil as the decree was read aloud in the grand hall of the council. She had imagined possible punishments, being sent to a distant colony, losing privileges, perhaps even public humiliation. But marriage? To a human? She could not hide her disgust. Humans were primitive in her eyes, emotional and fragile, incapable of understanding the complexity of alien society. The thought of being tied to one of them for life made her feel trapped, humiliated, and powerless all at once. The preparations began immediately. Lyra was escorted to a chamber where alien garments were removed, replaced with simpler, human-style clothing designed to make her appear ordinary, to erase some of the regal aura that made her stand out. It was another form of control, another reminder that she was no longer in charge of her own destiny. As she changed, she glared at her reflection, seeing a version of herself she barely recognized, a princess stripped of her privileges, facing a life she never chose. Traveling to Earth was another shock. The journey through space in a vessel designed for humans felt small and confining compared to the luxurious transports she was used to. Every detail reminded her of the punishment: the cramped cabin, the unfamiliar smells, the rough edges of human technology that lacked the elegance and precision she took for granted. Lyra spent most of the journey staring out the viewport, watching the stars streak past, feeling a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. When the ship finally landed on Earth, she was met with a landscape that seemed flat and dull compared to her home. The sky was a muted blue, not shimmering with iridescent colors. The buildings were plain, practical, and far from the crystalline spires she was used to. She was led to a modest house, a human home that looked ordinary and unimpressive. It was the home of her soon-to-be husband, Ethan. Ethan was nothing like the sophisticated being she knew. He was tall but unassuming, with a kind face and gentle eyes. His hair fell slightly over his forehead, and he looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and politeness. He greeted her, cautiously, unsure how to behave, aware of the enormity of the situation but unfamiliar with alien etiquette. Lyra could feel the cultural gap between them immediately, a chasm of misunderstanding and unfamiliarity that seemed impossible to bridge. She studied him critically, her pride refusing to allow her to show weakness. Every gesture he made, every word he spoke, seemed inadequate in her eyes. She saw the imperfections, the flaws, the things humans could not even perceive about themselves. Yet, there was something about his presence that made her uneasy, something she could not name. A quiet confidence, perhaps, or the calm steadiness in his demeanor that contrasted sharply with the turbulent world she had left behind. The first days were tense. Lyra resisted every attempt Ethan made to engage with her, whether it was offering a meal, showing her the house, or simply asking how she was feeling. She had been raised to command attention, to have others serve her, and here she was, forced to navigate the unfamiliar customs of a human household. She missed the formality of her home, the grandeur, and the certainty that came with knowing her place in society. Yet, as much as she wanted to reject him completely, she could not ignore his patience. Ethan never tried to force her into anything. He did not argue when she complained, did not scold her when she criticized him or the surroundings. He simply remained steady, present, and surprisingly attentive. That irritated her more than she expected. How could someone so ordinary, so human, be so unwavering in the face of her temper and disdain? One evening, she found herself standing by the window staring at the human sky. The sun was setting, casting warm colors that reminded her faintly of the distant sunsets back home. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel something other than anger, an unfamiliar sense of curiosity and reflection. The punishment she had dreaded seemed to stretch ahead of her like a long road she could not escape. Yet somewhere along that road, she felt the faint stirrings of change. The council's punishment was meant to humble her, to break her spirit. But in a strange way, it had already begun to do the opposite. It forced her to confront the unknown, to experience a world completely different from her own. And though she refused to admit it, it was forcing her to notice Ethan in ways she had not anticipated. The very idea of this human, his calm presence, and the quiet world he inhabited, was beginning to plant seeds of fascination. Lyra's mind raced with thoughts and plans. She vowed to resist everything, to remain proud and unyielding. Yet every day, the simple reality of living with Ethan chipped away slightly at her defenses. She was a princess, trained to control her environment and bend it to her will. But here she faced something entirely outside her control. It was a strange, uncomfortable feeling, one she had never known, and though she hated it, she could not completely ignore it. By the end of the first week, she had begun to notice small things. The way Ethan moved around the house with care, the way he noticed details she had not, the quiet way he seemed to anticipate her needs without her saying a word. It irritated her because it was subtle, almost invisible, yet undeniably effective. For the first time since arriving, Lyra felt the stirrings of something new, something dangerous, something that went beyond pride or anger. She would not admit it, not to anyone, not even herself. But the punishment that was supposed to break her spirit had begun to awaken something entirely unexpected. A seed of curiosity, fascination, and perhaps even longing had been planted, though she was determined to fight it. And so, Lyra faced her new life with a mixture of fury, pride, and reluctant attention, not knowing that this forced marriage was about to change her in ways she could never imagine. Life with Ethan was not what Lyra had expected. The first few days had been a whirlwind of irritation, confusion, and culture shock, and she had spent much of her time glaring at him or silently judging everything he did. Yet, as days turned into weeks, she began to notice small details that she could not ignore. It started with the way he moved around the house. Ethan's motions were simple, deliberate, and careful. Unlike the grand gestures and precise movements of her people, his actions were practical but somehow comforting. Even when he did something as ordinary as making tea or arranging the room, there was a sense of calm in his movements that was completely alien to Lyra. She watched him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Every day, she found herself comparing him to the people she had known on her home planet. Humans were clumsy, emotional, and unpredictable, but Ethan seemed to navigate life with a quiet strength that she could not fully understand. He listened carefully when she spoke, never interrupting, never dismissing her ideas even when he clearly did not understand them. There was patience in him that she had never experienced before, and although she refused to admit it, she found herself respecting it. Lyra struggled to adapt to human life. Even the simplest tasks felt strange and awkward. Cooking, cleaning, and walking in their world felt different from her technologically advanced home. Everything required effort, attention, and a certain kind of patience she was not used to. She often felt frustrated and longed for the ease and elegance of her alien world, but Ethan never complained. He never criticized her struggles. Instead, he offered quiet encouragement, teaching her without making her feel foolish. It was subtle, but it had an effect on her. Their conversations were another challenge. Lyra's mind worked quickly, filled with complex thoughts and ideas, and she often found Ethan's words slow or simple. At first, this annoyed her. She felt he could never truly understand the depth of her thoughts, the weight of her responsibilities. Yet, as she listened to him, she began to notice something unexpected. Ethan had a clarity in his thinking that was refreshing. He asked questions, he listened, and when he spoke, it was thoughtful and genuine. There was honesty in him that was rare in her world, where politics and strategy often overshadowed truth. One evening, Lyra found herself sitting across from Ethan at the dinner table, watching him quietly as he ate. She had planned to ignore him, to maintain her distance, but she could not help but notice how he smiled when he tasted the food she had prepared. It was not a grand smile, but simple and sincere. Something inside her softened slightly. She shook, her head frustrated with herself. Why was she noticing such trivial things? She was supposed to be angry, humiliated, and resistant. Yet, despite her determination, she could not completely hide the flicker of curiosity growing inside her. Ethan, for his part, was cautious. He had never interacted with an alien before, let alone a princess sent as a punishment. He did not fully understand her culture, her customs, or the pressures she faced. But he knew one thing: she was not comfortable, and he wanted to make her life easier without overstepping. He gave her space when she needed it, and offered support when she seemed willing to accept it. He did not push her boundaries, and this patience slowly built a fragile bridge between them. Despite their differences, moments of connection began to appear. Lyra found herself laughing quietly at Ethan's dry humor, though she quickly looked away to hide it. She noticed the care he took in daily tasks and the way he treated others with respect. She began to wonder how someone so ordinary could possess such remarkable qualities. Her pride fought against these feelings. She was a princess, trained to control and command, not to crave the attention of a human. Yet, the more she observed Ethan, the more she felt an unfamiliar stir of interest. The world outside their home also contributed to her unease. On Earth, things were slower, quieter, and less predictable than her home planet. People moved at their own pace, and the environment did not follow the precise order she was used to. At first it annoyed her, but she began to see beauty in it. The sunsets were soft and warm, the wind carried scents she had never experienced, and the stars, though different from those on her planet, had a gentle glow that made her feel unexpectedly calm. Ethan noticed these things too and often shared them with her, pointing out patterns in the clouds or explaining local customs. Lyra began to realize that humans, for all their simplicity, had ways of seeing the world that were unique and valuable. Ethan's presence encouraged her to pay attention, to notice details she had overlooked and to appreciate experiences she had never valued. For the first time in her life, she felt the tug of emotions she did not fully understand: curiosity, fascination, and even the beginnings of admiration. These feelings confused her. She had been sent to marry a human as punishment, and yet she was finding herself drawn to him in ways she could not explain. A turning point came one afternoon when Lyra attempted a human activity she had never tried before: cooking. She fumbled with utensils and ingredients, creating a mess that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Ethan, seeing her struggle, quietly stepped in to help. He did not scold her or take over. Instead, he guided her with gentle instructions and reassurances. For the first time, Lyra felt a flicker of warmth toward him. She realized that his touch, his words, and his calm presence had the power to ease her frustration and anxiety. Lyra struggled internally. She had been trained to resist attachment to maintain control, and to prioritize duty over personal feelings. Yet she could not deny the effect Ethan had on her. He was not like the others she had known. He did not demand, criticize, or manipulate. He simply existed alongside her, offering stability, kindness, and understanding. It was unsettling, yet somehow comforting. By the end of the second week, Lyra found herself seeking small interactions with him, though she refused to admit it. She began asking questions about his world, sharing trivial details about herself, and even laughing quietly at his observations. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it marked a significant change from the cold, resistant attitude she had maintained. Ethan, too, was adjusting. He understood that earning her trust would take time and patience. He did not expect love or affection immediately. He only hoped to make her life a little easier, to show that humans could be kind, considerate, and capable of understanding. His steady presence slowly chipped away at her anger and resentment, leaving room for something new to grow, a cautious curiosity, a fragile connection, and perhaps the first hints of desire. By the end of the month, the dynamic in their home had shifted. Lyra was no longer purely defiant. She still resisted in many ways, but she was also beginning to notice Ethan's qualities, to appreciate his efforts, and to feel emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. The punishment meant to humble her was starting to teach her something unexpected. Humans, though different and simple in many ways, had strengths and virtues that could touch her in ways she had never imagined. And so life continued, a delicate balance of resistance, curiosity, and growing connection. Lyra could not yet admit it, but the walls around her heart were beginning to crack, and the human she had once considered beneath her was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. Lyra's feelings were becoming more complicated than she had ever expected. She had spent weeks trying to resist the pull that Ethan seemed to have over her, yet every day brought new moments that made her question her own pride. His touch, small and unassuming at first, began to leave impressions she could not ignore. When he guided her hand through a difficult task, or brushed away a stray strand of hair from her face, she felt something stir deep inside her, a strange warmth that she had never experienced before. It made her uncomfortable but also curious. She tried to tell herself it was meaningless. After all, this marriage was a punishment, and humans were beneath her in every way that mattered. She had been trained to control her feelings, to maintain her dignity and authority at all costs. But her body and mind reacted differently. Even simple gestures like Ethan handing her a cup of tea or helping her adjust a sleeve caused sensations she could not explain. She would quickly pull away, glaring at him or turning her attention elsewhere, hoping to regain control over the emotions she did not understand. Ethan, for his part, noticed the subtle changes in her behavior. He had always been careful not to overstep boundaries, but he could not deny that Lyra's reactions intrigued him. She was strong, proud, and stubborn, a challenge unlike any he had faced before. He sensed the tension building between them, a mix of resistance and attraction that was both frustrating and fascinating. He approached each moment with patience, never rushing her, but always offering support and care when she allowed it. 1. Evening. A sudden storm swept over the area where they lived. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the sky was split by sharp streaks of lightning. Lyra was uneasy. Storms on Earth were unpredictable and intense, and she did not fully trust her senses to anticipate the danger. Ethan noticed her tension immediately. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she jumped at each thunderclap. "Stay close," he said softly, his voice calm and confident. "I'll make sure you're safe." Lyra's heart raced in a way she could not explain. She wanted to pull away to assert her independence, but she found herself clinging to his presence. His touch was grounding, providing a sense of security she had never experienced, not even in her home world. She felt a mixture of confusion and desire, knowing she should resist but unable to stop the growing awareness of how much his proximity affected her. As the storm continued, they ended up sitting together by the window, watching the rain pour down. Ethan spoke quietly about his childhood, about simple things like how he used to run through puddles or watch thunderstorms with his siblings. Lyra listened, fascinated. These were human experiences, simple and ordinary, yet they carried an honesty and warmth that she had never encountered in her structured and political upbringing. She began to see Ethan not just as a human or a punishment, but as someone with depth and humanity, someone capable of emotions and strength in ways she had never imagined. The physical tension between them was growing as well. Every time Ethan's hand brushed hers, every time he leaned slightly closer to help her with something, Lyra felt a thrill she could not name. It was dangerous, confusing, and exhilarating all at once. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, a trick of being in close quarters with someone new, yet the sensations were real, undeniable, and they left her both frightened and intrigued. Lyra's nights became restless. She found herself thinking about Ethan when she should have been sleeping, replaying small moments, the way he had laughed at something she said, the careful way he had guided her hand, the warmth of his presence during the storm. Her mind and body were betraying her pride, stirring desires she had never experienced. She felt both ashamed and curious, struggling to reconcile the growing attraction with the anger and resentment she still felt over the punishment she had been given. One afternoon, while they were working together on a simple task in the house, Lyra accidentally dropped a fragile item. Before she could react, Ethan caught it, his hand brushing against hers. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the world seemed to stop. Lyra's heart pounded, her face flushed, and she quickly pulled away, pretending it had meant nothing. But deep inside, she could not ignore the surge of emotion that had passed between them. It was a new feeling, one that mixed gratitude, admiration, and desire, all tangled together in a way she could not untangle. Despite her efforts to remain distant, Lyra found herself seeking out small moments with him. She noticed the way he smiled at the little things, the way he listened when she spoke, and the way his calm presence seemed to soothe the chaos in her mind. She began to realize that Ethan's touch and attention had a power she could not deny, a power that made her crave his closeness even when she refused to admit it. It was a dangerous awakening, and she felt both thrilled and terrified by it. Ethan, perceptive and patient, recognized the subtle changes in her behavior. He did not push her, but he offered quiet gestures of care, a hand on her back when she was tense, a gentle word when she was frustrated, or a simple smile that carried understanding. Each moment chipped away at her resistance, slowly, imperceptibly, until she began to notice that her heart responded to him in ways she could not control. A turning point came when Lyra injured her foot slightly while walking on the uneven ground outside. Ethan immediately knelt beside her, checking the injury with careful hands. He cleaned it, wrapped it, and ensured she was comfortable, speaking softly the entire time. Lyra was acutely aware of every motion, every touch, every glance. Her breath quickened, and she felt a heat spread through her chest. She wanted to pull away, to assert her independence, but a small part of her, a part she could not deny, longed for the comfort and reassurance he offered. The storm within her mind and heart was growing. She was caught between anger, pride, and the undeniable attraction she felt toward Ethan. Every day brought new moments that challenged her carefully constructed defenses. His touch, his presence, his simple acts of kindness, all were slowly eroding the walls she had built around herself. She was beginning to understand that this punishment, meant to humble her, was creating something far more complicated: desire, connection, and a growing recognition that humans could touch her in ways no one from her own world ever had. By the end of this period, Lyra realized that she could no longer ignore her feelings entirely. The tension between them had become palpable, and the attraction she had resisted was now impossible to dismiss. Her pride remained, yes, but it was tempered by a new curiosity and longing. She was beginning to crave his presence, his attention, and yes, even his touch, though she would never admit it aloud. And so life continued, a delicate dance between resistance and attraction. Lyra faced a confusing, thrilling journey, one where the human she had once seen as beneath her was slowly becoming someone she could not ignore, a person who awakened emotions and desires she had never felt before, setting the stage for a connection that would change both their lives. Lyra felt a shift inside herself that she could not fully understand. The weeks of living with Ethan had changed her. What had started as resistance, anger, and pride was slowly transforming into something deeper. She noticed the smallest gestures, from him more than ever. How he paused when she entered a room to let her pass. How he remembered her preferences without being told. How he always seemed aware of her mood. At first, she dismissed these as trivial, but she could no longer ignore the warmth they brought her. Ethan, too, was learning more about Lyra than he had imagined possible. He discovered her subtle sense of humor, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things she cared deeply about, and even the rare moments when she allowed herself to be vulnerable. He understood that trust would take time, but every shared moment was a step forward. He treated her with patience, never pushing too far, letting her take the lead when she felt ready. One afternoon, Lyra attempted to teach Ethan one of her homeworld games, a complex puzzle of logic and strategy. At first he struggled to understand, fumbling with the pieces and asking countless questions. Lyra felt the familiar urge to scold him, to correct every mistake. But she stopped herself. Instead, she laughed quietly, realizing that his persistence and willingness to try mattered more than immediate success. His patience and earnest effort impressed her deeply. They spent the day playing together, sharing laughter and teasing each other lightly. Lyra noticed how easily she could speak to him, how comfortable she felt despite her pride. It was a strange feeling, both relaxing and exciting. For the first time, she allowed herself to enjoy his company without thinking about punishment, rules, or societal expectations. She discovered that she looked forward to moments when he was near, when his attention was on her, and when she could simply be herself. Even mundane tasks became opportunities for closeness. Ethan would help her with cooking, carefully explaining how humans prepare certain dishes. Lyra, who had never done such work on her planet, found herself appreciating his guidance. She began to notice how thoughtful he was, how he remembered details about her comfort, and how he moved through life with an ease that she could not replicate. His calmness contrasted with the chaos and political tension of her home, and she began to crave that sense of stability. At night, they would sometimes sit by the window, watching the stars together. Lyra had seen countless skies in her life, but there was something different about this one. The quiet, the simplicity, and the gentle rhythm of the night on Earth gave her a sense of peace she had never felt. Ethan shared stories of human life, memories of his childhood, moments of joy, and even challenges he had faced. Lyra listened, fascinated by his perspective. She realized that humans, though simple in some ways, had a depth and resilience that was remarkable. Their conversations often drifted into personal territory. Lyra found herself sharing parts of her life she had never told anyone, her fears, her dreams, and her frustrations. Ethan listened carefully, never judging, never dismissing her thoughts. He offered understanding, reassurance, and sometimes a quiet word of wisdom. Slowly, Lyra felt herself lowering her walls, allowing him to see parts of her that had always been guarded. Physical closeness also became more natural. When they worked together, small touches occurred, hands brushing, accidentally a guiding hand on her back or a supportive hand on her arm. Each contact sent a thrill through Lyra, though she fought to hide it. She felt a growing need for his presence, a craving for the warmth and comfort that only he could provide. It was new and unfamiliar, but she no longer wanted to resist entirely. One day while they were walking outside, Lyra stumbled on uneven ground. Before she could fall, Ethan caught her effortlessly. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Lyra felt her heart race, her breath catching in her chest. It was more than gratitude. There was a spark, an acknowledgement of closeness, and perhaps something more. She quickly regained her composure, stepping back and insisting she was fine. But she could not erase the flutter of emotion that lingered inside her. The combination of trust, care, and growing attraction created a delicate tension between them. Lyra was learning to accept that her punishment was no longer just a punishment. It was an unexpected opportunity to experience connection and intimacy. She still struggled with her pride, but she could no longer deny the powerful effect Ethan had on her heart and mind. By the end of this period, Lyra had transformed significantly. She was no longer merely a proud princess living under punishment. She was beginning to recognize and embrace the value of closeness, trust, and emotional connection. She felt a genuine bond with Ethan, one that went beyond duty or obligation. Her feelings were complicated, exciting, and sometimes confusing, but they were real. She was beginning to understand that the human she had once seen as beneath her had become someone she could not ignore, someone whose touch and presence she now craved. As time passed, Lyra's feelings continued to grow in ways she could no longer deny. The anger and resistance she had felt at the beginning of her punishment had faded, replaced by curiosity, admiration, and a quiet longing. She found herself thinking about Ethan when he was not around, replaying moments of laughter, gentle touches, and the way his eyes met hers when he spoke to her. These thoughts were both exhilarating and confusing. She was beginning to realize that her heart had started to change in ways she had never imagined. Ethan, meanwhile, had grown deeply attached to Lyra. He admired her intelligence, strength, and courage even when she was stubborn or critical. He noticed the small changes in her behavior, the way she lingered near him, the moments when she sought his advice, and the subtle warmth in her eyes when she smiled at him. He understood that trust and emotional closeness were blossoming between them, and he met her halfway with patience, understanding, and gentle care. The emotional bond between them became undeniable. Lyra began to seek moments of privacy with him, simply to talk, share thoughts, or enjoy each other's presence. She no longer feared showing vulnerability, and she was surprised at how safe and supported she felt in his company. Ethan, in turn, encouraged her openness, responding with empathy and reassurance. Together, they explored the unfamiliar territory of connection, slowly building trust, affection, and mutual respect. Physical closeness naturally followed. It was subtle at first, a hand brushing against hers, a guiding touch on her back, or a comforting hand on her shoulder. Each moment sent shivers of warmth through Lyra, and she realized that she was beginning to crave these touches. It was no longer a matter of resistance or duty. Her body and mind responded to Ethan with an intensity she could not ignore. She felt a growing desire to be near him, to feel the comfort and reassurance that only he could provide. One evening, a particularly cold night found them sitting together near the fireplace. Lyra wrapped herself in a blanket, but Ethan noticed her shivering and offered his own. She hesitated but accepted it, and as they sat together in silence, she felt a deep sense of peace. The warmth of his presence, the gentle rhythm of his breathing, and the quiet comfort of being close to him awakened a longing she could not name. It was a desire for closeness, for intimacy, and for the unspoken connection that had grown between them over the past months. Lyra began to acknowledge her feelings, even if only to herself. She admitted that she admired Ethan, that she valued his presence, and that she felt a growing attraction that went beyond simple curiosity. The initial punishment that had brought her to Earth had unexpectedly given her a gift, the chance to experience connection, care, and intimacy with someone who respected and understood her. She felt grateful, excited, and a little frightened. By the depth of her emotions, Ethan, sensing her inner conflict, approached her gently. He spoke quietly about his own feelings, about how much he valued their time together, and how he had grown to care for her deeply. His honesty touched her in a way she had never expected. She realized that the walls she had built around her heart were no longer necessary. They had been slowly replaced by trust, affection, and desire. The bond between them reached a turning point when they faced a small but meaningful challenge together. Perhaps it was a minor accident, a household problem, or even an emotional moment where Lyra confided in him fully. Ethan responded with calmness, care, and protection, showing her that he was someone she could rely on completely. In that moment, Lyra realized that she no longer saw their marriage as a punishment. It was something she had begun to choose in her heart, a source of connection, comfort, and desire that she could not resist. By the end of this chapter of their lives, Lyra had transformed completely. She had moved from defiance and resentment to trust, emotional intimacy, and desire. She craved Ethan's touch, sought his presence, and valued his love and understanding. What had begun as punishment had become a journey of emotional growth, connection, and discovery. The story concluded with a quiet moment of unity. Lyra leaned against Ethan, feeling the warmth of his embrace and the strength of his presence. She no longer resisted the feelings she had fought for so long. Instead, she embraced them fully, recognizing that the human she had once considered beneath her had become someone essential to her life, a partner, a confidant, and someone